Thank you. I forgot about the standing ovation. It's all downhill from here. Okay. I don't live in Georgia now or Atlanta, but I did for a while. And we had a saying, I think, that I have 10 pounds of mud in a 5-pound bag. So I have a lot to cover. So, and I want to save time to talk about it at the end. So I'm going to do my best to kind of keep a pace, if you will. But yeah, thanks for having me. I'm pumped to be here. Everyone's a nonprofit? Awesome. And how many of your nonprofits are like 0 to 5 years old? 5 to 10? 10 plus? Oh, daggone. Congratulations. And then would it be embarrassing if I did how much revenue you have? Is that embarrassing? Okay. I don't have time to go to Charity Navigator and look everyone up. So we'll just do the same thing. 0 to 5 in revenue?
0 to 5 million?
Yes. Oh, that was quick. All right. 5 to 10? 10 plus? Okay, awesome. Well, I think that what we're going to talk about today applies to everyone, so that's good. As Dawn mentioned, I have been doing this for a while with all sizes of organizations, some with zero money, some with just have an idea and no money, and some with bukus of money or whatever the term would be. So I hope that what we talk about today will apply to everyone. And I want to talk about just a kind of this question here. I'm standing in front of the thing. This is horrible. How can you draw more people into your work? And obviously that's important because...
Do you need a charger or you good?
This is not mine. I don't know.
Oh, we're going to take it off.
Right. This is an important question, obviously, because what you do is impactful, I presume, as nonprofits. You have something that you care deeply about, and there's people counting on you, beneficiaries of your work, of course, who need whatever you're doing to work out on their behalf. So to me, this is a pretty big question. It's a complex question. I'm going to tackle it from one particular angle, which would be more like a messaging or brand or marketing sort of angle, because that's what I do. But certainly, that's only one side of the question. All right. Former Nike CMO David Grasso said that what we found to be most effective at Nike is inviting people to join us in what we believe in and what we stand for. So my premise is that if someone selling sweatpants and sneakers can figure this out, then certainly someone doing impactful, purpose-driven, mindful work like you all could also figure this out. And so I think what we can do today is we can look at a couple of things and discuss them and see maybe how Nike does this or how others do it and how that might apply to you. So we'll look at 3 things. The first is understanding the power of narrative. I'm going to make a distinction between narrative and storytelling. I was just in an awesome thing over on the other side of the building around PR, media, and storytelling. And so storytelling is super important, but I'm going to abstract it another layer. The second is designing a narrative cycle. So back to the question of how do we invite people in? Well, we'll do something, we'll use the power of narrative to invite them in through this flywheel or cycle, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll discuss it a bunch as a group. Hopefully, I've managed my time well, no promises, and we'll be able to kind of apply it to perhaps what you're doing. All right? So, yeah, so let's talk about narrative first. So from the beginning of humankind, people have been telling stories. The creation myth has been told across cultures and religions in the form of a story. The Greeks had pretty awesome stories too of wars and journeys and epic adventures. We have, of course, great modern storytellers too, like Steinbeck and Baldwin and Angelo and Robinson. And so we're surrounded by stories. Jonathan Gottschall wrote a book called The Storytelling Animal, and he makes the point that we are by nature suckers for stories. It's like just kind of in our DNA. It's how we were wired. It's how we think. It's how we process, et cetera. So what I would suggest, though, is that telling stories is not enough. I've certainly given 100 presentations on great storytelling. I think you should tell great stories, and I think we can talk about that if you want. But it's not going to be enough to get people fully bought into what you're doing. So I hope to make a case of why. So to make my case in the most ironic way possible, I'm going to tell you a story. All right. So this is Fontaine S. McCamey. His friends called him Bud, and I called him Pop Pop. So this is my grandpa. My grandpa was born in a small mountain town in Virginia. He was born into the family home. They had no running water or electricity, and in the 4th grade he dropped out of school and went to work for his dad and his brother to help raise, to help have money for the family. At the height of World War II in 1941, he walked into the local recruiting office in that town in Virginia, and he lied about his age, and he, along with hundreds of other thousands of men and women in the U.S., joined the war effort. After the war, he came back home. He met my grandmother, had 3 beautiful daughters, one of which, of course, is my mom. He started a grocery store in the middle of town, worked there for a while, then retired, or sold it, and worked for the U.S. Postal Service. He educated himself by buying the encyclopedia set. So back in the day, they were printed. And then every year, you would buy supplements. So he read them literally from A to Z, and then bought the supplements, and this is how he learned. He helped start a small Baptist church that still exists today. And after he retired, he traveled to all 50 states, 48 of them by RV. So if this resonates with you at all, that's because it probably sounds something like what we might call the American dream. My grandfather was born into basically poverty, went to fight for something that he felt dearly about, came back home, had a white picket fence, and raised 3 beautiful daughters and started a business. This is like, this is like on our birth certificates, this idea, if you live in the US. So this is what I mean when I talk about the idea of narrative. And this particular narrative is so powerful that it can actually influence entire cultures. People go to war for it, obviously, like my grandfather and others. People flee oppressive situations to come here and take part of it. I argue with my family about it over cranberry sauce and yams, about what it means, and we get very passionate about this idea. And so to me, it's amazing that something like this could have so much power that it would shape people's lives as a result of it. So we'll use this American dream narrative as we work through this idea, and we'll just keep coming back to it as an example of what I mean by the idea of narrative. We'll just keep orienting ourselves around this idea. So what actually is a narrative then? I've kind of given you an example of one, so let's talk about what it actually is. A narrative really is a meaning container. So a narrative takes a bunch of disparate ideas, random events, and things that kind of individually don't make a lot of sense, and puts them in a nice container for us so we can process what's going on around us. And so in that way, it helps me understand my past. Oh man, why is it that my grandfather could drop out of school in the 4th grade and still own a business? That makes no sense. But it does make sense if I process it through the context of the American dream. It also helps me make sense of my present. Why in the world would you be able to make $20 billion or something selling chicken? That's absolutely bonkers. Where does that happen? Oh, it happens because someone one day started a business called the Dwarf House or whatever. They sold chicken and they were able to grow it and have this amazing family business that serves millions of people around the world. That only makes sense in some sort of construct that might be called, or that we might call, or one construct that might be a narrative. And so in that way, a narrative helps us, gives us coherence, and it gives us meaning, and helps us kind of organize our world. The other thing a narrative does is that it makes a claim or a promise. So fellow Brooklynite, that's where I live, James Truslow Adams defined the American dream as the dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. So he just does 2 things there. He makes a claim. The claim is that there's opportunity for everyone, and the promise is that life will be better. And so because that narrative is also giving us meaning for our past and our present, and then now it's giving us a claim and a promise, that means it's actually not static. It's ongoing. There's something happening around us that we're kind of living into and that we're organizing our lives around. And by the way, I have to do something in order to get that promise. I have to buy the encyclopedias. I have to go fight in a war. I have to do something, start a business, whatever it is, have kids, in order to live into this idea and in order to fill that promise. So it demands something of me. All right, back to story. Stories actually prove the narrative is true. So stories are probably whatever you learned in freshman whatever. They're a who, what, when, where, and how of an event. And so in that way, those stories are needed inside the context of a narrative because they have to prove what they are. We have to prove the narrative to be true. So I told you the story of my grandfather in order to prove that there was a narrative or an idea called the American Dream. I guarantee you, if I asked each of you to give me a story that sounded like the American Dream, you could do it. If you go to Tyler Perry's website, he's from Atlanta, so I looked it up. His bio literally says that he's the epitome of the American Dream. So that story, his background, his context, his upbringing, and then now he is successful, that proves out that the American Dream is true. It also proves out why a Russian immigrant can come here with his parents and start the world's most successful software company, proves why we can have the first black president, proves why you can escape persecution and come here and start a nonprofit and end up speaking at TED one day, like the founder of Girls Who Code. So that's a narrative in that story, but there's another angle to this, and that's a counter narrative. So some of you may be sitting here thinking, I don't know, I resonate with parts of that, but not all of that, or I resonate with none of that, and that's not actually the narrative I've lived into. And while that's not okay in this particular context, it does prove out another point, that you can have a narrative and then you can have a counter narrative. And of course, the job of the counter narrative is to push back against dominant thinking. So you have a dominant narrative that has a set of mindsets and behaviors and beliefs and language, and then oftentimes you'll have a counter narrative that says, hey, I need to push back on those mindsets, behaviors, beliefs, attitudes, et cetera, because I see something different, and my stories don't prove out what you're saying. And in fact, I have another set of stories, and I have another narrative. In this case, maybe the narrative's called something like Not My 4th of July by Frederick Douglass. And since the beginning also of the American Dream narrative, there's been this whole other counter narrative. It's had different labels and names throughout the years, and it has its own set of stories that prove it to be true for itself. And what I would suggest is that while that American Dream narrative or counter narrative probably applies to all of us pretty universally, we also have a set of narratives that we're living in a different way as well. So I told you my grandpa didn't go past 4th grade and didn't go to college. Well, all of his daughters did, and my dad did. And so guess what was super important in my family? Going to college. Why? So you could get a good job and make money. It's nothing about learning. It was simply economic. And so what in my narrative, in my family, the claim was that if you go to college, you'll get a degree, because the promise is that you'll get a good job and make money. I bet that we're all living into a narrative called consumerism. Consumerism claims that if I'm sad or if I'm jealous of my neighbors or whatever, I can buy something and I'll feel better. And the promise is I'll be able to live the good life. If you're in the business world, maybe you have a narrative of something called speed and progress and scale, and that bigger is better because make more money. And so all of these are making a claim and a promise, but the bigger point is this. They're all happening at different sort of strata of our life. So a familial level, a communal level, an institutional level, an industry level, and also at a brand level, which gets us to what you do. All right. I hope you're tracking. And like I said, I'm going to just clip through it so we can get time for questions. But the point is this, that those powerful narratives that cause people to go to war also help brands invite people into what they're doing. You're probably familiar with this. This is Nike. I read that quote by David at the beginning, which I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, what we found to be most effective is inviting people to join us in what we believe and what we stand for. Of course, they have $1 billion, so they put it into these great taglines like find your greatness and just do it. But that's not the narrative. That's just the kind of expression of it. What their narrative is basically, anyone can be an athlete. You think athletes are people that have special equipment and special training and they get paid. But no, anyone that has a goal can get out and be an athlete, and in doing so, they will be great and they can achieve their dreams and they can break any particular barrier that they want. Apple does the same thing. You're no cog in the industrial complex bound by your goofy PC, but instead you can be creative. And you can live out your creative side. You can make music. You can take awesome pictures and videos and things like that. And so that's their narrative. We worked for an organization called Matchbook Learning. They go into the bottom 5% schools in the country, and they help turn them around. And what we found is what you all probably know. If you have a kid and you live in inner city Detroit, you still want the best for that kid. And that kid still wants to grow up and do something. So we asked the kids what they wanted to do. This particular kid wants to be a detective, and so he wants to solve mysteries. And so the narrative here is that, hey, you can be whatever you want when you grow up, and we're going to help you do that and achieve that goal for you. This is another nonprofit that works in the newborn hearing space. So when you have a baby in most states in the US, you get a newborn hearing screening. And guess what? After you have a baby, I've heard, you're not really clued in totally to what's happening in that moment. And so when you get this newborn hearing screening, you don't know the results. You don't remember. There's just too much other noise going on. But that thing's super important. So the narrative in this case is not about the newborn hearing screening, but instead the narrative is that as a parent, you think your kid can do anything. They can probably go to Mars one day if they wanted, and we want to help you parent your child to their full potential, but you got to do something. You got to get the newborn hearing screening. All right? So narratives are these super powerful meaning containers that help us make sense of our past, present, and future. Helps me know what I value. Helps me know what I think might be worth fighting for. It probably gives me some sense of how I organize my life. They make a claim and a promise if I live into it, so they're participatory. Unlike a story, when did a story happen? I don't know, to some other person in some other time, some other place. Didn't happen to me. But in a narrative, I get to live into it, I can participate in it, and they can work for organizations. Hopefully you don't come up with a narrative that people will fight for, but you can apply this same thing. All right. So all of those examples I mentioned basically flow into what we'll call a narrative cycle. Before I go into it, let me just, everyone tracking? Mm-hmm. All right, awesome. So I mentioned already, twice, that narratives are alive and they're participatory. They're happening to me as I live into it. If I buy a TV, I'm living the good life. If I go to college, I'm getting a good job, whatever. They're happening to me. They might be happening to you too, also, I don't know, but I'm definitely taking advantage of them. So because they're participatory, you need to get people into them. You need to invite people into them so that they can take part in the claim and the promise and be a part of what you're doing. In this case, nonprofit work. Okay? So there's 4 aspects to this: purpose, invitation, participation, and collaboration. I'm going to bounce through each one. I'm going to keep using the American Dream narrative if you'll let me, and then I'll go back to the Nike one, the school one, and the hearing one. All right? All right, so purpose. The first thing to point out is that this is not your organizational purpose. That's confusing to people sometimes, including me, because you've heard 9,000 TED Talks on developing your why. And you should totally do that. And if you want to talk about that, we can. But this is not your purpose. This is the hearer of the narrative or the participant's purpose. So what do they want out of life? What's meaningful to them? There's probably some Venn diagram, if you can imagine a 3-circle Venn diagram, because everything awesome is expressed in a construct of 3 circles. And they're all over here today. There's probably some Venn diagram here that's your organizational beliefs, your stakeholders' beliefs, like what they want out of life, and then cultural opportunities, so what's going on around you that you can tap into to fuel this narrative or this purpose. And so we're looking, when you're developing or thinking about the purpose that you want to communicate or you want to invite people into, you're thinking what might be meaningful to them. You're also thinking, how is that true up with my work, because it can't be incongruent. And then you're also thinking, what's going on around me that I might tap into. I have a quick example that I wasn't planning to share, but it just came to mind. We did some work for a toy company called Tegu, and they make these They make magnetic wooden blocks. So think old school blocks like you might have had as a kid, except magnets in it, so you can kind of construct stuff. It's super cool. They had a social mission that was to restore the Honduran economy through manufacturing of these blocks. And that's the story they told. They literally told that story all the time. Guess who cares about economic revitalization in Honduras? And are also toy buyers. Yeah, well, yeah, like one small slice of moms. They live in Connecticut, they make a lot of money, and that's it. Outside of that particular place and time, no one really cares. But guess what moms do care about? They care about overstructured time. They care about being too busy. They care about not having to, sign up for 9,000 things, and they don't want their kids for the most part, don't want their kids on screens. So at the time, Tegu was struggling with trying to get people into their mission. The free play movement was starting to bubble back up in the US. And so instead of talking about economic revitalization of Honduras, we started talking about boundless play or free play, and how, as a parent, you can help your child be less restricted, have some cognitive capabilities and creative capabilities through play, and as a result, your purpose as a parent can be lived out through what we're doing. So not the organizational purpose, which was economic revitalization in Honduras, but the purpose of the person buying, in this case, the product. We see that in the American dream too. The purpose here is my achievement, not the government's purpose, but my purpose. I can achieve. I get financial success, freedom, a comfortable life, security, all of those things. So I live out that purpose. All right, tracking on purpose? All right, awesome. I only make eye contact with people that shake their heads yes. So then, obviously, or not obviously, but the point of this call or talk is that we have to invite people into what we're doing somehow. And that's either explicitly or implicitly. We want them to somehow find their way in here. Now, somewhere in between purpose and invitation is that claim and that promise. So somewhere in here, you're making a claim. Oh, hey, your kid won't be trapped in front of a screen all day. And if they do that, they will grow up to, not be serial killers or whatever. So there's a claim and a promise, and this is happening in here. And if you believe and buy into that claim and promise, and you have some purpose that's greater than the organization, then perhaps you might want to come along in what we're doing. In the case of the American dream, the invitation is like, yeah, anyone. You've got to come here. You got to do something. We'll get to that in a second. But anyone can take part of this. So it's just an open blanket invitation. Next, participation. Remember, it's not a story, because a story, you can't participate in a story because it already happened. But in the case of a narrative, you can't participate. So you're now experiencing this narrative through some sort of activity. In the case of the American dream, if you'll recall, my grandfather had to go fight to have this thing. He had to buy encyclopedias. He had to actually start a store or have kids or whatever. He had to do something in order to participate. And so that participation is now starting to fuel, because you're finding purpose out of this thing, and because there's a natural input into it, you kind of want to participate because you think it's going to help you up here. But you don't have to go it alone. There's people to help you along the way. So it's not you by yourself figuring this out. It's you with others figuring this out, because collectively we're all trying to do this. And so if that's the case, then as they're being invited into this thing, there's someone around, or there's people around to collaborate with. In the case of the American dream, it's different government programs, perhaps. It's teachers, banks, communities, etc. All right, let me do Nike real quick. Oh yeah, this is it again. I was like, why is that on there? All right, so let's do Nike again. We looked at it before. The basic Nike narrative is that anybody can be an athlete, and you can overcome any barrier you want if you set your mind to it. So they basically say the purpose is hard work equals greatness. Who doesn't want to be great? I don't know, that's got to be in there somewhere in our hearts. They make an invitation. Hey, all athletes belong inside of what we're trying to do here. And by the way, anyone's an athlete. It's not a different type of person. So kind of like the American dream, this is a pretty wide open invitation. you got to do something. You can't just lay on the couch all day and be great in this case. You got to get up. You got to, set your alarm. You got to put on your shoes, hopefully, that have Nike logos on them, and you got to do something. And by the way, if you decide to do that, no problem. We got an app that can help you. If you go to the Nike store in Soho, you can act like you're an NBA player, and they'll like measure your jump, which is approximately half an inch for some people that have been there. And they have events and things to draw you into what you're doing. And by the way, I meant to mention this before, the more you do of this, oh yeah, I actually am feeling pretty awesome and like I can achieve my dreams. And I want to be drawn more into what's happening so that I can live out this purpose, and I'm going to participate more, collaborate more, and it just keeps kind of going. All right, I mentioned the school called Matchbook Learning. Same basic idea. Hey, as a student, you have a particular set of gifts and desires. At the youngest age, my kids, I have 4 kids, they would tell you what they wanted to be when they grow up. It changed 9,000 times, of course, but they knew they wanted to do something, and they could tell us what it was. So we, as parents, or in this case, as the school, in the school case, in the case of Matchbook Learning, we help them identify their dreams. Hey, you want to be a detective? There's a CIA agent. People want to be doctors because their mom had cancer. Like just all sorts of like really heartwarming stuff. We didn't have to convince them to be a part of what we were doing because we asked them about their purpose and structured everything around it. There was a natural invitation, and they inherently wanted to participate. So how do you participate in this particular case? You attend the school. You define your dreams. You do your stuff. But guess what? You don't have to go it alone. There's a bunch of teachers here. There's parents. There's a school district that will help you figure all of this out. Same with the hearing nonprofit. Everyone who's a parent wants the best for their kid. It's universal. One of the ways you need to do that is to learn about this newborn hearing screening. So you're invited to like look into this thing and participate by finding out what happened. And once you know what happened, we'll help you figure out what to do with the pass or the fail or whatever. And by doing that, you're now helping your kid live into or to reach their full potential. So you're just kind of like creating this circle. And and by the way, that has its own set of stories that go with it too, of course. But once we have this umbrella narrative, then all of these stories start to ratchet to and attach to something, and the invitation is a little bit more obvious or been helpful than just like a click here to sign up for or email us, although that might be part of it. All right? So I asked at the beginning how you can pull more people into your work. I said that, did I say it was going to be abstract? It's going to be a little abstract. But I think that if we can, as an organization, as a nonprofit, if we can kind of nail this idea, that that there's something bigger than marketing, there's something bigger than the stories that we tell, we can start framing everything inside of this narrative, and then all of those other things will start to have a coherence to them in a sense, and we can naturally invite people into our work. All right. I told you I was going to save 10 to 15 minutes for questions. I saved 10. So, all right. Who has a question? What did not make sense? What do you disagree with? Yes. You can say what you agreed with, too. You don't have to be combative.
I'm just pondering. So I'm thinking about this in a little different way. Like it's directed toward the people we want to help and the people we want to help us as an organization. So like your hearing example was talking about bringing people in who you want to get those hearing tests, but we're also thinking about bringing in donors and supporters and volunteers. Can you talk about how those two things are intertwined in this message?
Yes, such a great question. This actually was in the other thing too. So you have a beneficiary of your work. You want them to come take part of your program, so you need them to know what's up. And then of course you also have people that give you money and time and volunteer and all that stuff. So I would call those your stakeholders. And you're getting exactly the point. When you tell a story, you have to tell a story that is geared for either one of those people. And they may not ever hear the other person may never hear the story because it might only be particular for them. The point of and I'll get to your question. The point of the narrative is that you would construct a universal narrative that would apply to either a beneficiary or a stakeholder. And in that, you actually can reach both with some level of purpose. So in the hearing thing, sure, a baby can't, follow up with their newborn hearing screening. But guess what? That baby, if they did fail that newborn hearing screening and they are born deaf or hard of hearing, they are going to participate in the same exact narrative as their parent at some point, because they're going to want to reach their full potential, and the community and resources that I mentioned in the collaboration stage are both for them and the parent. So while the tactics might be different, the narrative strategy would be the same across all beneficiary sets and stakeholder sets. The same with the school. Parents want something. The parents get to pick where their kids go to school by and large. So we had to let the parents know that, hey, we're here so that your child can figure out what they want to do when they grow up, and we're going to help them live into it. The kid is there, but they also want to do something when they have something they want to do when they grow up. So there's an overlap then between the beneficiary's purpose, what the beneficiary wants and the stakeholder wants, and that narrative tries to bridge the gap. So you're not stuck feeling like you have two websites for everyone in order to communicate effectively. Does that help or make sense? Okay, awesome. I'm so glad you asked that question. What else? I would have talked slower. Yes?
How long do you think it takes to change a narrative?
Oh man, that was a good one. How much money do you have?
I know it depends on, obviously, I guess how long the narrative has been out there. But for me, our organization serves veterans. I think there's always a sad song kind of driven around that. So what I want to do is change the narrative to more towards, I guess, get away from the sad song. I want to tell that these people are inspirational. We serve their country. Our institution, that kind of beat, but in a tone that is more uplifting versus come save us.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have a follow-on question?
Yeah, I mean, and I hear what you're saying, so I'm wondering, do we have to change it? Because, your core competency, that's at your core, but can you just extend it? And still embrace, what you built your program on, because that's not going to change. But the process in getting out the narrative can change.
Yeah. So it does make sense, and I think you're getting at part of it for sure. An existing narrative, if it's powerful enough, is incredibly complex to change, and takes a very long time. We work with a nonprofit that does schools in Africa, and guess what the narrative is of that? Oh, these are poor people that need white people to give them money so that they can go to school. That's incredibly difficult. Savior complex narrative is an incredibly difficult narrative to break. It's almost impossible. But I think you still have to do it. I think you still have to try. And so some narratives are going to be more powerful and harder and take longer. I would suggest for you, maybe, in the tiny amount of context that I have, you also have a tough narrative. Your narrative, I mean, I live in New York City. I see homeless vets all the time. I don't see a lot of ticker tape parades, especially now. Not a lot of support for veterans. So you got powerful forces that you're fighting against. What I would suggest, though, is that it's probably not a switch. It's a dimmer, and that you have to figure out what 10 on the dial is, and just start rotating it over time till you get there. And so you would redefine the narrative, and then you would stop telling the old stories, basically, and you would just go from there. Yes.
I guess would that apply too, as well as making sure that you're not exploiting others? Because I feel like, and even in our organization, we see that being that we're a preschool that facilitates education for young children who are battling homelessness. So when you see that, it's just a lot of, hey, we're, a nonprofit organization that needs money for these children, but sometimes we can almost get to that borderline where we're exploiting our families, opposed to uplifting them and shedding a positive light on what they're doing and who they are.
One of the most embarrassing things I've ever been in was at my church here when I lived in Georgia. I won't tell you where it was. And we had a ministry to a mobile home community of illegal immigrants and dreamers. And we got backpacks for them. We had a tutoring program. And they brought them up on stage and gave them the backpacks. And I thought I was going to, I was just going to melt right in my seat. So I have a particular sensitivity to what you're saying because it's so ridiculous. So so I don't totally know how to answer your question, but I would say two things. One, this is where narrative can help you. So I just mentioned the organization in Africa that does the schools. So their basic narrative is that from influence, or from injustice to influence, and from poverty to power. We never show injustice and we never show poverty. We only show the other side of that thing. And so one way to get around it is to, sure, I mean, it would be really helpful to talk. I mean, I showed you a kid that was dressed up like Sherlock Holmes or whatever. But if I'd taken him to his house and shown that's, to me, that would be exploitative. This is hopeful, and I think, or the goal is at least, that it's hopeful and empowering. So I would say, like in your case, perhaps there's some rules around the messaging that we only show the outcome, never the thing. By the way, you should see the pictures from downtown Detroit around that school.
Right.
But guess what? We don't use those pictures because they're horrible. I would not want you to come into where I grew up and showing what my house looked like.
Thank you.
Yeah, hope that helps. Last question, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that kind of responsible for what you said. I've done work with the Obama administration and other organizations, communication. What irritates me, what the points that bring up is fascinating because many nonprofits that I work with, they show the pain of the people, but they don't show their principles. They show and they exploit. That's exploitation. When you don't take a holistic view of a family and show how they're beautiful, how show their community, there's an imbalance in the way we tell that narrative that benefits the nonprofit. It doesn't benefit that person always, and then it leaves them with a stigma.
Yeah.
So when people look at that target population, they only see their pain, they only see their failures, and that's only one aspect of a person.
Yeah.
So you get sick on Thursday, you overcome it, and you improve. When nonprofits focus on your sickness on Thursday, that's not fair. So I think that's, if nonprofits, if we were honest and tell the whole story, then people could live a life without stigma.
Let me nuance that real quick because that was really helpful. I have 4 kids. I mentioned that 2 through adoption, and someone told us very early on, and people stop you. People very bold with their questions, and they'll stop you and they'll ask you in the grocery store like, "What's your situation?" And the kids are standing right there. And we learned very early on that you always answer the question for the child, never for the person that answered it. And I would think the same is true for this type of storytelling. Always write that story like you're going to give it to the person you're writing about. The second thing I would say is that the reason nonprofits do what we're all talking about, hey, here's a fly in the eye story about whatever, is because that's what a story does. A story is obviously a Trojan horse into emotions. The sort of ethos, pathos, logos idea, it is the emotion, it is the thing that you lead with. And the greatest way to get that emotion is to show me some completely impoverished, broken situation that is totally, I can just immediately identify it's not okay. To your point though, a narrative can parse out the value set that you're living into as an organization, that the beneficiaries are, back to your question, that the beneficiaries are living into as an or as people, and as the stakeholders are living into. I'm not a poor person in Africa, but I want people to be empowered. That's a universal gettable. And so all 3 of us, a beneficiary, a stakeholder, and the organization can have the same value set. And so when you tell that story of the beneficiary, you're telling it from that value set, not the broken situation. And I can relate to it, and it's equally I can be equally empathetic as a result of it.
All right.
All right.
All right.